Hi everyone, I'm Jen Strayer from the KHS America Academic Alliance. I want to thank you for sticking here with us as we work through some technical difficulties. And again, welcome to our newest session of Virtual Education Series. If you're not familiar with our platform, on the right of your screen we have a chat where you can engage, share some of your stories. To the right of the chat is our questions tab to make sure that Jennifer has a chance to see if you have any questions throughout. And I would like to introduce you to our presenter today. Ms. Jennifer Kummer is a session horn artist here with us in Nashville. And she is the adjunct professor at Lipscomb and Tennessee State University and one of our new XO French horn artists. So Jennifer, take us away.
Hello, everyone. It's very nice to be here. I can't even really see who's in the room, and I apologize for my late arrival. Part of this lecture today is about how to take auditions, and what I do for a living is very much like an audition every time I go to work. And I kid you not, this evening we played a film score for a movie. Maestro Lightford wrote these amazing high horn parts, and it was one of those situations where I needed to stay and be here, and it was just a day that kind of went on a bit and very fun to play. And I was supposed to get here and try to work out technical difficulties before we started this PowerPoint, but anyway, here I am now, and learning to play under that kind of pressure when you have a million things in the back of your mind, you know, it doesn't matter what's going on. The very first time I experienced this was playing Mendelssohn Midsummer Night's Dream, and I had gone for a practice in the woods, and I was driving home, and a deer ran out in front of my car, and I hit the deer, and I had to deal with that, and then I had to go play that performance that night. These are things that happen in our lives all the time, and so learning how to deal with stress and play under nerves and those kinds of situations are a little bit of what I do. So I don't know if we were gonna go to the PowerPoint, and now I've lost the picture. There it is. So, okay, PowerPoint. This is a lecture about how to prepare students for their next audition. I'm very, very grateful to KHS America, Rick DeYoung, Mike Summers, Chris Henkes, and Jennifer Strayer for all that they have done to help me become an artist, and their patience with me and technology, their patience with me and losing my voice. I'm very grateful for the new horns that they're creating that are professional models. And so I didn't include in the bio that I am a XO artist, but I love being one, and I love having access to the horns. I am noticing that this PowerPoint is somewhat small. When it was on my iPad, I could read everything. Okay, now I have it turned so that I can read it a little bit better and I can expand the screen. But anyway, my career started when I was about 23 years old. I had gone to Western Illinois University, and then I went to the University of Southern California for grad school. And I had an opportunity to take an audition for the Memphis Symphony. It was my first professional audition, and I will talk about obviously middle school and band auditions that I took early on that pertain to band directors today. But I just think that there's no limit in terms of age groups and when people can actually take auditions and win jobs, because I didn't think I'd ever win another job again. And then I turned around and decided to take one when I was over 50, and I ended up winning that. It's just a matter of setting your mind to it, doing the work that it takes, getting used to kind of doing that work. And I find it to be really rewarding early on to win. It's always rewarding to win a job, but it's the preparation and getting ready for the auditions that can be pretty fulfilling. Sorry, I'm trying to see if there's, okay. Having a little trouble seeing. I might just turn my iPad on and look at my own PowerPoint if I can't read it, but I think I can kind of read this. One of the things that I think is hugely helpful for people is to start taking auditions or start playing your instrument at a really early age. For me and for my kids, I took violin lessons when I was about 6 years old, and that was Suzuki. My mom would come to the lessons and we would study and learn music, and it just became kind of ingrained in my soul that I was going to play music for the rest of my life. And I didn't know that at the time. It helped me with my studies and everything else, but getting your kids involved in music early on so that they're really used to it and they live and breathe it gives them a bigger comfort zone, I think. The other thing, like performing on a stage, getting dressed all up and then going to play recitals on stages early on any instrument. Generally for the little ones, it's violin or piano. It's a little hard to hold a French horn when you're 5th grade or younger, but it can happen. I've seen people play trumpets, but definitely violin and piano is a great background for learning wind instruments. In junior high school, the things that I remember that helped me the most to become a great player, I had a band director named Tom Johnson, and we definitely had playing tests all the time. He recommended private teachers, and I studied with a man named Jim Conder once a week. And I remember that my parents had me call to set up the lessons, and I think that's a good habit to get kids into, is setting up lessons themselves. They learn that responsibility and they learn that this is for them. It's not the parents making them do it. I mean, they may be making you make the call, but basically you were the one that's handling it and taking care of it. So that's hugely important. But Tom Johnson, we would do these playing tests and we'd have to audition for chairs right from the get-go. So I learned at a pretty early age that it mattered and that you had to play well to have a spot, and you had to play really well to have a top spot, even in junior high school. So I appreciate that. And I can still remember my competition that I had then. It was really kind of a healthy competition. Sometimes it was a little intense, but it created really great band programs. I went on to high school to study with my dad, who had an excellent band program, a good enough program that we went on to Midwest, and I got to play in that group. So auditioning for chairs then was important. Then even as high schoolers, and they have this all over the country, the state auditions for mid-state, all-state orchestra, band and orchestra, I would audition for those. And I'd now adjudicate the one in Alabama. I did last year, and I'm going to do it again this year, but that's via YouTube. So that's a little bit different situation. But just talking about what it's like to go to auditions from that very early stage, I can remember we had this scale sheet that had all the major scales, and it would bleed right into the minor scales and harmonic minors. And I even would get a magic marker and color in every note that was flat or sharp, you know, like I really, really studied that music backwards and frontwards. And I still play that scale sheet to this day. And I also remember playing Lincolnshire Posy as one of the excerpts, and there was stopped horn in that. I remember it was at a civic center that was ice cold. So learning how to play in conditions that aren't necessarily conducive to your best playing because you're freezing cold because there's ice all around you, on top of being nervous. Those are all the types of experiences that have helped me, you know, eventually in the long run play in a lot of different given situations. So the next thing that I think is important to talk about are concerto competitions. Those are auditions that, what's hard about that on certain instruments is that we don't have the technique of violinists and pianists. We don't have the repertoire that's quite as competitive. So winning concerto competitions is a pretty big deal. But one positive thing is that there are so many violinists and pianists that they kind of do want to hear some other instruments play. So I've gotten to play concerto as a high schooler, and in University of Southern California, I was going to play a concerto and leaving and taking a job instead. Summer music festivals are huge. Those are the types of auditions where kids go and they'll send tapes in for Interlochen. I think I sent in a tape. I don't know how they do it today exactly for Interlochen, but I remember getting on a train and going from Macomb to Chicago, where they would have big audition centers, and going in with a pack, and you'd have your number and your turn, and you would play your audition. It prepares you for professional auditions later. And then you'd wait for a few months, and you would get either a big thick envelope or you'd get a tiny thin envelope. And so those are heartbreaking experiences, or really, really, really exciting experiences, depending on how well that goes. And then finally, auditions for college. And in college, you get tryouts in college. And so then finally, the orchestral auditions. And it looks like I do have control of the next slide, maybe. Yeah. So helpful tips that I think, get my notes here. Okay, recordings. That pertains to both listening to recordings and listening to yourself. That's hugely important. Most orchestral excerpts that we listen to several different versions of it. The ones that come to mind now for my students that I have, and I have students that are 10th grade, 7th grade, I have a few college students, and I've only started teaching again recently just because the schedule is so unpredictable, as tonight was an example of that. But if you can, one of my colleagues said that if you can play for 20 minutes and record yourself while you're playing, and then take the horn off of your face and listen for 20 minutes, you can make tremendous strides by just taking the time to analyze what you just did. And that saves your chops a little bit from, like, as a horn player, we get really beat up sometimes practicing, and then if we have to work on top of it. So taking that 20 and 20 and listening to yourself and listening to others' recordings of stuff. What I was going to say about that one student that I have that's auditioning for Allstate, they're doing the Beethoven Sonata, little pieces of it. It doesn't even go down to the very lowest note in that piece, but I definitely recommend, and there's so many places to find recordings on YouTube, libraries have them, but listening to several different versions and listening to entire pieces will give you a maturity and understanding of the music that is going to come through with it'll improve you in general as a player. The next thing, and some of these are kind of obvious, everybody's heard this stuff before. I'm just reiterating a lot of things that people already know, and hopefully people can enter in the comments if they have thoughts about it. But mock auditions. And so this particular kid that came over yesterday, his dad said, well, we have this big Allstate audition coming up, so maybe we could do a mock audition. So we set it up that way, where I set the stand up and put the music and the sight reading out, and then he had to leave the room and walk in. And so he's usually comfortable playing lessons for me, but to come in cold, sit down and actually portray being an actor in an audition setting was really telling. The first thing that happened was that he hadn't emptied his water, even though we talked about it. Until you actually go through the steps and actually do it, you don't really realize how important it is to empty the water. And then he played a few notes in the room, and the notes that he played in the room were a little bit not confident. It just left an impression that wasn't the greatest. So we learned from that experience, and then not 10 minutes later, I said, let's just do this again. And so we set up a stand in my living room where his dad was sitting, and he did the same thing. And he learned those three, he remembered to empty the water. And then we talked about whether he was going to play some notes first. And if he did, could he do them as confidently as possible? And since it is sort of a fanfare opening, I said, why don't you just start with that? There's nothing that you don't know how to do. So if you're poised and ready to go, why don't you just make the first notes of your audition actually be the piece? So that's what he did. And all of a sudden he just played with so much more confidence. It made a great impression on me, and his dad as a judge is like, okay, this kid can play, he's ready to go. And why second guess yourself? The only reason I think that we've ever played notes inside of a room just to test the room is if you've never played in the room before and you want to get a feel for the acoustics. So that could be a good reason to play a couple of notes and but make sure they're confident and you're really just doing it to get, like, have a goal in mind. Don't just be testing your chops or testing your read. All that needs to be kind of done ahead of time. So that's a helpful tip. Hopefully, handling nerves. I need to take a breath. I'm going very fast. When I talk about handling nerves, the first thing I read is deep, calm breathing, focus, preparation. So sometimes when I'm running and my heart rate and my adrenaline gets going very, very quickly, and this happens in classes a lot at the Y, they often say if you take slow the breath down going out, just slow everything down as much as you can. We tend to want to pant or like just kind of almost hyperventilate with excitement or nerves, or just, you're out of breath. But if you deliberately try to slow the breath down, all of a sudden the heart rate kind of evens out. And I've experienced this with physical fitness a lot. And I think that can be true in any kind of given audition situation where students might tend to get nervous. Just take some deep breaths, focus, and take your time. There's no rush in these kinds of situations. And then another way to think of things is in terms of nerves, if you can try to think of it as being excited rather than nervous, that can help you too. Like, there's a certain heart rate that's a flutter for me now, that it may be nerves, but it's also kind of an excitement. Like, here we go. This is an opportunity to shine. Sometimes we fall flat on our faces, but sometimes we really, really excel. And generally, the more that you do it, the more that you're going to excel at doing it. So take lots and lots of auditions, play lots and lots of mock auditions, but try to think about these certain things that happen to you and your students and apply it each time you try again, and know that there will be other times to try things again. Handling nerves, what else did I think? Oh, some of the things that have helped me, a little bit of prayer or meditation before I start. That can go along with deep breathing. My daughter's really been into these crystals and the symbolic meaning of different crystals. And so sometimes I think, oh, if I have this crystal with me or something, that's a positive thing. And other people later in life start taking Enderol, beta blocker type drugs before big auditions. I don't expect that for middle school and high school students. I haven't had a lot of experience with that. One thing that has helped me, believe it or not, is just eating a banana a little bit before, not right before, because as a wind player, you don't want that in your horn, but sometimes eating a banana kind of calms, it's just there's some chemical in the banana that seems to calm me down. And again, it could be totally psychological, but that's another tip that I have. Regarding physical fitness and preparing for auditions, one of the things that I often think when I come to play sessions where I never know what the music is going to be, and so we have different clients, and so each time as an orchestra, basically it's not just me, but everyone in the group, we want to prepare for these new clients, and everyone that hears us for the first time has a decision about whether or not they're ever going to come back to Nashville and record us again. So that's what I mean about, like, me going to work is like an audition every day. So one of the things that helps me calm my nerves about doing that is if I go for a run for like 3 miles in the morning. That's the hardest thing that I'll probably have to do in my day, most likely. Like, I'll breathe the hardest, I'll sweat the most, my feet will hurt, I risk my knees, I have to hastily shower afterwards so I don't look like I just ran 6 miles or 3 miles before a session. So all the stuff, if I can get that done, somehow when I go to work at 10 o'clock, all of a sudden going to work is almost like a picnic comparatively. So if you find other things that are harder to do than taking auditions and incorporate those in your life, and they don't necessarily have to be harder, but just different, something a little bit challenging, something that really gets your blood flowing, I think those are really helpful tips for taking auditions. Some people run, one of our best horn players also races bikes for a living. And Maybe horn playing helps his nerves when he's racing bicycles. I don't know. Water skiing. I've known competitive water skiers in our group. Not so much anymore as we're aging, but there used to be a lot of water skiing, and that, you know, that to go play a symphony concert after you've been on a short 28, I forget the dimensions of the ropes now, but really skiing hard and leaning and, you know, risking things and getting the adrenaline happening on your passes through a slalom course can be pretty intense. I think that you should tell your students that judges want you to play well. I know that you want your students to play well if you're judging them, but definitely judges like myself, we all want people to play well. I've sat on committees, even in orchestral situations. Everybody wants that candidate to come in and play really, really well. So knowing that there was one comment I have in my one of the people that I asked. He said that a lot of people on committees maybe aren't necessarily going to even play as well as the people auditioning as you get into older orchestras, but that's kind of comical to me. Dress comfortably. I remember one particular St. Louis Symphony audition that I took where one of the person who ended up winning the job ended up, she was wearing all black, like concert black, not formal concert black. It looked like comfortable black, but it just kind of portrayed, I mean business, I'm here to work. This is just another performance for me. And so she came in and she ended up winning the job. And I always thought, I don't know that I'm necessarily going to wear black, but you want to look good and professional. Sometimes they'll never even see you come out from behind the screen, but you're around peers. You want to play professionally and look professional, but also very, very comfortable. You want to have comfortable shoes. That's true, definitely, in these situations. You know, maybe layers in case the room is cold, or if it's too hot, you can take a layer off. So another suggestion about getting prepared for auditions, and maybe this is, let me see where I am slide wise. Next slide. Let me go back a slide. The other thing, one of the people that I looked up when I was researching for this lecture was the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra Talent Development Series. And this woman, Chelsea Sharp, did a great video that you should check out. CHELSEA Sharp, SHARPE. She suggested a bunch of things that I thought I might add to this list that I agree with and I hadn't thought of on my own, so I wanted to give her credit. But definitely I've done all of these things, and that includes looking up the musical terms so that you know exactly what the directions are on the music. You want to have definitions of those terms. Do cold run-throughs. So I mentioned mock auditions, but if you can do cold run-throughs where, like my student did, it wasn't a total cold run-through because he is kind of warmed up, but if I were to go home this evening after having played all day and I wanted to play through an audition list, maybe I would stop by school and go into the concert hall and just play through it once without anything, just bam, 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 play it and be done with it. So cold run-throughs can be helpful. Researching composers. If you're going to play a sonata by Beethoven and you don't know much about Beethoven, how are you going to necessarily portray Beethoven? So that I like that the All-State in Tennessee chooses real pieces that, you know, that like substantial works like a Beethoven sonata, even if it's just a short excerpt for mid-state. I think it's a great idea, and you get introduced to a composer that as a horn player, you get to play their repertoire all your life and love doing it. Having a practice journal was one of hers. I definitely did that during the pandemic. A lot of times, honestly, sometimes prior to the pandemic, when I was working a lot, I neglected to practice. During the pandemic, I was forced to practice, and I kept a journal every day of every month during that time until I got busy again. And there was a lot of practicing happening, and it really forced me. Like if I skipped a day and had to write a question mark, it ate at me that I didn't practice that day. And sometimes I didn't practice as much as others, but I would write down if I went for a run or anything of physical fitness help that would help my breathing and support. That's kind of counted as practice for me. So it was just a yoga journal that my sister had given me with blank, it just said yoga on the front and then lines through it. I would pencil in the date, and hopefully January would fill up a page and I'd go on to the next page. Putting music in a binder and having it ready to go was another one of Chelsea Sharp's suggestions. Now I have an iPad that I'm not very happy with this evening because it didn't work for this live stream, but I'll figure that out for next time. But I like having my music on the iPad if that's all working well. And I use that a lot over the summer when I was doing brass quintet type concerts. Another suggestion is when you're practicing, starting with the tricky sections first, like do all the tricky stuff first so that you're not too tired by the time you're ready to play the harder stuff. Next slide. So this basic fundamentals, private instruction, consistent daily practice, that I've kind of gone over all of that. Tone quality. When you have a private teacher, hopefully you'll have a good concept of tone. Listening to artists that play your instrument should give you a good sense of what a good tone quality is. But all that stuff is hugely important when you're playing auditions, because right off the gate, they're going to hear a sound and do they want to hear this song, this sound in an orchestra? And I tend to relate to orchestra more just because that's been my field, but that's true in session work. It's true in playing musicals. Anything that I do as a freelancer is, do you want to hear that sound? So people listen for tone. So that's a really good fundamental thing to practice right off the bat. Learning technique. I have a bunch of books from every instrument coming up that you guys can keep the slides. These are my peers that have generously donated their time and effort to give you lists of the books that they use to teach with and practice on their own. Subdivision. So in most auditions at the middle school, junior high school level, there's going to be sight reading. And I'll talk a little bit more about that under resources. But there's a great sight reading website that you can practice these level 3, 4, 5, 6 things. But everything that you do mathematically should work out. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and is the way I always did it. And subdividing is so important. In high school, we had one called a machine called a tap master, where it would just be a bunch of X's on a line, but you'd tap along with it, and it knew which one you were on. It would score you at the end. You had to be right on time and in time with what you saw on the page, and the book just got harder and harder as you progressed. And I loved that thing. I wish they still had something like that. Basic fundamentals is having a well-maintained instrument. That was another thing regarding emptying water. Sometimes, no matter how hard a horn player tries to get all the water out of their instrument, it seems like there's still water in the instrument. So if the slides are coming out super loud and clanky, or they're not moving at all, it's going to take a lot of extra time to get the slides out, and it's going to be kind of obnoxious. If you have them really well lubricated with, I recommend Hetman's number 8, and I'm sorry, I'm just kind of gearing toward horn players about this issue, but I'm sure clarinet players have their things. If they can't get the instrument apart or swabbed quickly, then it's going to be an issue. So having a well-maintained instrument that you can empty quickly, getting used to emptying the water quickly or swabbing quickly. Same with flutes, trumpets. Maybe don't make a ton of noise doing it. Just, subtle, just get the water out and move on. But having a really well-maintained instrument. You don't want to have the valves clicking too much or the keys on an instrument. Those need to be, they can be distracting in an audition if you're hearing a lot of noise from the instrument. You can tell right away, is this instrument being cherished and cared for, or is this a school instrument that nobody really cares about and hasn't taken the time to serve well? So it seems like something that you wouldn't need to say, but I see it a lot with my students, and it's something I work on with them because I think it matters. Let me see. These are websites that I have put on this PowerPoint because I'm not sure that students or teachers necessarily know about them. I just chose, like, if I thought, well, if I were going to go audition at WIU for college, now there's websites to do that. When I was a kid, a junior in high school, when I wanted materials, I remember writing 7 letters by hand and having them, stamped and sent to the New England Conservatory, to Northwestern University, to whatever schools. I ended up going to USC, but that's how we had to do it then. Now you can just click on these websites and it will tell you every single detail about what the audition requirements are, when they are, what the music is. So why not have your students go ahead and look at some of these sites at WIU or Interlochen, or I put Vanderbilt, Blair, or Rice University. Like, what are these schools going to be requiring? And get an early edge on college auditions by going ahead and finding out what they're asking for. And so that's why I provided that in the slide, and hopefully that's of help to people. I was going to try and click on the link just to show you, but I'm terrified of doing that and never being able to see you and come back. So I'll let you guys keep the slides if you want them. Just know that anything that you want to know is on the web, and it's really cool. I want next slide. Technology. This is another one I'm afraid to click on, but you'll have the slides and you can click on them or just look them up. But the practice tools that I use Fourscore. So that's served me really well in a lot of capacities. For teaching, for sure. I use it all the time for teaching. People have their own books to practice out of, but until we know what book they're going to be using, I can pull up my Rubank books right there on the screen. Since I'm more of a mobile teacher, I have all that stuff and I don't have to bring a ton of books around with me. The Fourscore app also has, you can use it for brass quintet concerts, and you can use your little foot pedal to turn the pages and your music doesn't go blowing off everywhere. So I know iPads are expensive, and I know that there are probably other tablets that can be bought, but that is seeming to be a wave of the future for a lot of players here anyway. We still use paper music in sessions a lot, but a lot of people who play musicals, they just get their iPad out. The conductors definitely do that more and more. So that Fourscore app along with a tablet is incredible. There's a metronome in it. There's a recording device in it. And so I mentioned recording yourself and listening back. If you're looking at the music and right there looking at the music, and you can just go to the camera side, there's all these settings and you click on it and hit record. It doesn't save forever and ever, which I kind of like. I don't necessarily want to keep it forever, but if I want to listen and look at the music I just recorded, it's right there at my fingertips. Hugely great. I mean, for me, it was a Sony Walkman and a cassette tape, and I'd have to rewind, The technology today, I wonder where it would have taken me if I'd had it a long time ago. The tonal energy tuner, this is this tuner that it either smiles radiantly when you're playing in tune, or it goes like this if you're not. And I hate that when he is unhappy with me. So it's incentive, this tuner, the TE tuner. It also has analysis. A lot of people rely a little too much on tuners instead of their ears. So one thing I like about the total energy tuner is that they have a drone. You can have it play a sound, and so you can play with it. You can play a third above it. You can play a fifth, any intervals you want based on that tuner's broadcast. And I love that you can do that. I mean, you could sit at a piano and do that, but with a French horn, you got to take your hand off the bell or take your hand off of the fingers, levers. So having that, to play along with if you don't have other players a lot, that's a really great tool. And I could spend a whole lecture just talking about the tuner, or the total energy tuner. It's really great. I haven't even learned it all. The iStrobo soft tuner, when I was growing up, the type of tuner I had was a strobe tuner. And the one I just got one from my father-in-law, and that one you have to turn a dial every time you want to play a different note. They have some that you didn't have to do that as time progressed. Those are really, really expensive. But for just like $5.99 or something, you can get the iStrobo tuner right there on your phone or iPad. Listening, you can listen through Apple Music, through YouTube, Nexos. The Hoopla one is I just found recently with my library card, I was able to download like all the Mahler symphonies for a week. I can listen to them as much as I want. I'm sure I can renew them, but there's so much stuff just with your library card and these awesome, you can download movies through Hoopla. It's a great app to have. So those are some technology things. The other one was a sight reading app. I'm trying to find, it's called sightreadingfactory.com. I discovered this after I created my PowerPoint. I'll say it again, sightreadingfactory.com. So I think that's helpful. I think that one costs money. I don't own that one. The father of my student actually helped me log into that so we could practice for his sight reading here in Tennessee. Okay, this is, I thought, I play the horn. I told you I feel like I kind of audition every time that I play a performance or I play a session. It feels a little bit like an audition because I don't have tenure, for one thing. I can be let go if I start missing notes, if I'm, if they don't like my personality, if I'm snotty to the people that I work for. There are a lot of reasons to be let go from any given situation. So I've explained all that about me. And one of the things I thought might be cool for you guys to hear from is somebody who's had a lot of experience as a band director. So I put this slide in as I think it can be helpful. Sorry, I'm going to have to find it on my iPad because my screen's too small, and maybe those of you on phones can't read it either. But I'll go over it here when I pull it up. Give me 1 second. Kevin Revis was a dear friend of mine, is a dear friend of mine. He was a band director for many years at Ingersoll Middle School in Canton, Illinois. And so I asked him, listen, like, what were some things about teaching that you wish your students, like, what did you want to have your students do to play better auditions? And he wrote, I'll confess, having spent my entire career at the middle school level, I've not been involved with prepping high school horn players and advanced, hold on. I've not been involved with prepping high school horn players and advanced etude technique books. I have prepped and witnessed countless soloists for, am I still on here? For various performances. I've always been slightly irritated over the lack of thought in relation to the very beginning of the event. I've witnessed many players who were obviously ready to perform once they commenced playing, but have given zero thought into what to do prior to walking onto the stage or an audition room. I always quizzed my students on what they were going to do just prior to performing, being ready in place outside the performance venue, entering gracefully with their music and judges' copies ready to place on the music stand and hand over to the judges. Don't be in such a hurry to start performing. Take your time to adjust stands, the chair, the light of sight with an accompanist, and then compose yourself with a moment of reflection. He's said I've witnessed too many performers just race into the room and attempt to begin playing as if to just get it over with. I've always preached to my kids to take their time, not start until they have acclimated from the space they just came from to the event for which they have prepped. Don't be in such a hurry to start. Settle in, breathe, fundamentals in mind. Don't worry about the clock. So really, a lot of that kind of just summarizes the things that I said about breathing and taking your time and focusing, meditating. Think about the crystal you have in your pocket, or a prayer to God, or whoever, whatever spiritual help that you want to receive in your life. I think it's very calming to the nerves, soothing to your thoughts. It's calming to a band director to know that a person is comfortable and ready to play, or a judge, like this person is taking this seriously. They can be placed in a position of responsibility because they're thinking it through. those all, before you even play a note, you can kind of make an impression by really getting ready and set for an event. So I hope that's a helpful hint. Next slide. Thank you. Dr. John Dougal, my father, he taught band at Danville High School for many, many years, and then at Western Illinois University. Certainly heard and ran many, many auditions. And so I asked him for his list because we don't get to talk much, and I'm like, I kind of want to know your list. He says, prepare using your best practice skills. So best practice skills is, again, taking it really, really seriously and slowly. I think I haven't neglected to say about playing things very, very slowly. I do this with my students all the time. If you play it slowly and correctly, there are these grooves in your brain that form the memory that to this day, even though I don't play Strauss First Horn Concerto every single day, I learned it in a way, and slowly and accurately and correctly, that I still know it. It's like really by heart. So if you're playing your major scales incorrectly 100 times, they're probably going to come out in an audition incorrectly. But if you play them 3 times slow and correctly, probably by the 4th or 5th time, you could sail right through them. I can play all my scales pretty well now because I took them slow and really, really methodically and ingrained that correctly. His next comment, and I agree with this, work on the areas of excerpts that present the most difficult sections. And that goes back to Chelsea's from the Atlanta Symphony, that development thing. She said the same thing. If you work on the tricky stuff first, and then, like even in sessions today, then we were working on this really, really hard stuff. I'd rather get that done and over with, and then, then you can relax and do the stuff that's a little bit easier. Record your session and be your own worst critic. So when you play auditions, you're often playing for other people. Yeah, but you also need to impress yourself. And that was one thing, and I don't think he said this, but in terms of competition with other people, don't compete so much with other people. You want to compete with your own best self. So I think that's huge, in terms of friendly competition. I don't ever want to see my colleagues fail. I want them all to play their very, very best all the time. If they beat me, that's fine. It's nothing to do with me. They played better than their last self. For my job, for me, is to always play better than the last time I played and to constantly keep trying to improve. So if you can think about that and be your own worst critic and say, I could have done that better. Why? Ask peers and teachers to critique in a setting like the audition. So one of the things I mentioned to my student Mike yesterday was they mentioned it's going to be behind a screen. So why not set up a little curtain and have somebody sit behind it? Because I guarantee you the first time that I saw that, like in a professional audition, and they have this carpet so that nobody hears your shoes, and then I noticed that I was thinking that the judges were going to be on the stage. No, they were way out in the hall with a curtain in front of them, so like you're not sure what you're going to see. So get used to like different ways of not being sure what you're going to see, and see if you can imitate them so that it's a little bit more familiar. Run the entire repertoire several times to routine it. Those are kind of like those go play it cold. He recommends reading The Inner Game of Music by Barry Green. Get a restful evening before the audition. Eat a light meal well in advance of the audition time. One of the things that was on the slides was talking about socializing before an audition. That was something I don't think I mentioned, but you can socialize as much as you want when it's all said and done, and you can be cordial and nice to people, but kind of just stay in your own space and give people their own space in audition situations. I think that's a good idea in general. So the next bunch of slides, I don't know that I have time or if you have any interest in going over them at all. So I'll kind of just run through them and then leave time for questions for everyone. And I am going to maybe need help finding out where to see the chat and answer questions on this phone. But basically, I asked some of my closer peers that I work with or see all the time where we teach what they recommended, because all I can say all this about auditions, and you can take as many auditions as you want, but until you've developed the technique and learned the skills on your instrument, you're not going to audition well. So I thought it was hugely important in this lecture, in teaching people how to prepare their students for auditions, for you to have a list of each instrument's greatest suggested repertoire. And some people's lists were a little bit more extensive than others. And we're going to start with one with Dr. Donovan. She has a pretty great list, and it's a big list. So I think it's important that you get a copy of these slides, and then you can have them. And when your flute students ask what's a good book, or if you have people that are teaching private flute looking for materials, it's always good to have a resource where you can find out what other people are doing. So hers, I'm not going to read through the entire list, but you can see it here. She's a Nashville private lesson instructor, teaches at the Blair School of Music. And I thought I fixed that spelling, but I didn't. There's no E on Blair. I apologize. She's on faculty at Lipscomb University as well. And I think she just recently played a Baroque flute concerto somewhere. So really great artist and flautist and teacher. So that's her list. And next slide. This is Eric Graton, a phenomenal flautist, principal flute in the Nashville Symphony. And he was recently playing principal in the Metropolitan Opera prior to the pandemic. His wife's a violinist here, and they opted to stay in Nashville. But he uses some of the same books that Jessica Donovan recommends. He doesn't teach really. So basically his take on it was that he mentioned a couple of daily exercise technique books. He focuses on good practicing and mental prep for auditions. So kind of simple, but yet he's a just phenomenal player. The next one is Nashville Session Oboist Summerly Di Pasquale, and she recommends these, the Barrett book and the Fairling book, and I think saxophone players recommend one or two of these as well. There was a, basically up above if you go back one slide, I just wanted to explain this Barrett Studies. There's this little website. I haven't clicked on it at all, but somebody did a dissertation, I think, and I just wanted to copy that into this link in case anybody had wanted more information about the Barrett Studies. So that's what that little link is. If anyone wants to look that out, that's an oboist. Thank you. Next one. Chattanooga Symphony and session clarinet player Emily Boland recommends the David Height book and the Albert Scale book, and the clarinetist in the Nashville Symphony, Catherine Kohler, the Krepsch, I don't know if I'm saying that right, Krepsch book, and the David Height book. I'm going to go through these quickly. I've got 10% battery on my phone, but Maya Stone is a bassoonist, and she sent me this whole awesome page. And so if you keep these slides, you'll have bassoon resources that are incredible. Jimmy Boland, saxophone and woodwinds. He recommends Rubank. A lot of people in common had these, mentioned the Rubank books. I personally think the Rubank books are excellent for middle school into high school. And even during pandemic, I practiced those Rubank books because it's all the keys, major and minor. There's technique, there's scales, there's duets, there's solos. There's so much just in those books alone to get back in shape and to get in shape and prepare. Preston Bailey, another session player in Nashville, and does a lot of private teaching of these age kids. And so that's his list. One of the things as a horn player, I used to practice my dad's Charlier etudes if I got tired of my own. So that's good practice for sight reading. Here's another band director's perspective, University of North Alabama. He also recommends the Rubank, and I just felt so validated when I had chosen Rubank as well. Here's my choices for tonguing Arbans. Any brass instrumentalist who wants to be good at tonguing, get the Arbans book and study that. Next slide. So there's Arbans and Rubank. That's me. And then Patrick Wally, he's the one that talked about the 20 minutes playing, 20 minutes listen to yourself, singing through excerpts. He's another great next slide, next horn, next player that he's another player. He beat me in the third horn audition in Nashville, but we work together all the time, are great friends, and I really appreciated his list. And I'm think now that I know what it is, I'm going to practice his list. Another session player, Barry Green. There's another guy who moved here recently named Bob McChesney. He has technical studies for trombone, and Barry recommended that book. So trombonist, Bob McChesney, technical studies for trombone. Next is David Lauke. And David Lauke is he has a doctorate, and he has a very extensive list for the trombone. And so take the time to scrutinize that a little bit more closely if you get to keep these slides and you want advice for trombone players and other low brass instruments. Prentice Hobb, I got a lot of low brass here, but Prentice was the one that had some comments about, because he takes a lot of auditions and has had some really great success at it. So I just wanted to add his insights. The only thing you have control of is the way you play the way you play, because it does need to be a good fit in the orchestra. So yeah, next slide. And then not last, this is tuba. Neil Canucci, principal tuba in the Chattanooga Symphony Orchestra, Nashville session artist, and his website is there. If you want to click on zneil.com, you can see the types of work we do in Nashville, because he's got a really great list of those. So that's, I also recommend Koprosh for horn. He's got Koprosh on his list, and a bunch of other stuff as well. And then the last one is Dr. Andy Harnsberger. He's the director of percussion studies at Lee University. And so he gave me some percussion ideas. So hopefully that's of help to you. How do I go to questions here?
Hi, everybody. We do not currently have any questions right now, Jennifer. I'll give everyone a few seconds to type any last minute questions, but you will see we did add the slides into the chat if you would like to take a look over those lists. They're full of great information. And I just want to thank Jennifer again today for coming out and presenting this great session for us. Please keep a lookout for additional clinics coming to our virtual education series soon. And thank you again, everybody, for attending tonight.
Because the details matter. A continuous F-side tube formed from an innovative 3D bending process facilitates unimpeded flexibility throughout the range of the instrument. Precisely engineered valves with traditional string linkage and phosphor bronze bottom caps provide smooth, quiet, fast action from the first day out of the case and for years to come. A one-piece lead pipe created to reduce resistance contributes to precise slotting and superior intonation. Multi-axis positionable thumb lever and pinky hooks have been created to provide maximum ergonomic comfort. The horn you've been waiting for, from XO Brass.